There was a time when German cities trusted the weather. Clouds meant safety. Darkness meant protection. It sounds strange now, because we know what the night over Europe eventually became. Radar beams, burning cities, bomber streams, searchlights, electronic ghosts, and aircraft hunting one another in darkness. But early in the war, overcast skies still felt like a shield. If clouds covered a city, if the moon was hidden, if the target disappeared beneath black weather, many people believed the danger had passed. That belief was not imaginary. It appears in the reports. It appears in the records. And it appears most clearly in the moment it failed. What changed was not simply a bigger bomb or a brighter flare. It was a signal, a calculation, a new way of seeing. And after that, even the clouds could no longer promise safety. Somewhere above the Dutch lowlands, a German night fighter lifted from a concrete runway and climbed into the black. The landing gear folded into the belly. The twin engines pulled harder. Behind him, the flare path faded into the ground until the runway lights became a thin amber thread, then vanished completely. The pilot was alone now. Only instruments glowed in front of him. Only the cold air surrounded him. Somewhere ahead, a ground controller would soon guide him into the bomber stream. The voice would give him headings, altitude corrections, and the geometry needed to close on a British bomber moving through the dark. This was how the system worked. The fighter climbed. The controller watched. The radar tracked. The bomber died. Then, without warning, tracer fire ripped past the canopy from above and behind. For a split second, the cockpit filled with light. The attack had not come from the bomber stream. It had not come over the target. It had not come from the direction the pilot was trained to expect. It came from an aircraft already waiting above his own base. The hunter had lifted into the night and found that something else had been hunting him first. To understand how a Canadian crew could turn Germany's own air defense system into a trap, you have to begin with the system itself. By 1942, the sky over the Reich was not empty darkness. It was organized, measured, divided. The Germans had built a defensive machine made of radar stations, searchlights, controllers, and twin-engine night fighters. The British called it the Kammhuber Line, after the Luftwaffe officer who created it. It stretched from Denmark down toward France, covering the routes British bombers used to reach Germany. This was not a wall of concrete or steel. It was a wall of detection. Each section of that wall was a controlled airspace box. The Germans called these zones Himmelbett, canopy bed, a strangely quiet name for a place where bomber crews died. Inside each box, the process was almost mechanical. A Freya radar detected incoming bombers at long range. More precise Würzburg radars tracked both the bomber and the night fighter. In a control room below, operators watched the positions and passed them to a ground controller who calmly guided the fighter into position. Turn left. Climb. Hold course. Close. Closer. Above, the night fighter obeyed. The bomber crew often had no idea the trap was closing. They flew through darkness, through cold, through cloud, trusting that night itself still gave them some protection. Then a dark shape appeared below and behind. Sometimes the German pilot saw only exhaust glow. Sometimes his onboard radar gave him the last few seconds of guidance. Then came the burst. Cannon fire tore upward into the bomber's belly, wing roots, engines, or fuel tanks. A Lancaster or Halifax caught fire. A wing folded. A fuselage opened. 7 men fell into the night. Then the radar box reset. Another bomber entered. Another interception began. The strength of the Kammhuber line was that it turned chaos into procedure. Night fighting should have been confusion. Instead, the Germans made it methodical. Detect, track, guide, attack, destroy. For the German controllers and night fighter crews, this created something more powerful than efficiency. It created confidence. They believed they had learned how to control the dark. And for a time, they were right. For the men flying RAF bombers into Germany, the Kammhuber line was not a technical concept. It was the thing killing them. Not all at once. Not in a single spectacular disaster. But slowly, raid after raid, week after week. Early in the war, Bomber Command often sent aircraft individually across the night sky. The logic seemed sound. Spread the bombers out, make the defenses divide their attention, reduce concentrated losses. But the logic was wrong. A scattered bomber stream gave each German radar box exactly what it could handle. One bomber, one controller, one fighter, One interception, then another, and another. Instead of overwhelming the system, the RAF had been feeding it targets one at a time. The loss rates became terrifying. Crews understood the arithmetic even if no one wanted to say it aloud. Every mission completed was one more step into a narrowing corridor of probability. A crew might survive tonight, and the next raid, and the one after that, while still knowing that the numbers were closing around them. Courage did not solve this. The bombers were too slow to outrun the fighters. They could not outmaneuver them. Their defensive guns could not cover every angle in darkness. And they could not hide forever from radar. Something had to change, not just in the bomber force, in the system hunting it. The answer was already sitting on British airfields. It did not look like the answer. It was not a huge bomber. It was not armored like a fortress. It did not bristle with turrets or carry a large crew. It was sleek, fast, wooden. The de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder. Built largely from plywood, balsa, spruce, and glue, the Mosquito seemed almost too delicate for the brutal machinery of modern war. But its appearance was deceptive. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, it was one of the fastest operational aircraft in the world. The original idea had been radical. No defensive turrets, no heavy gun positions, no extra crew, just speed. If the aircraft was fast enough, it would not need to fight its way out. It would simply refuse to be caught. At first, many doubted the concept. Then the Mosquito proved them wrong. It could fly fast, high, and far. It could serve as a bomber, pathfinder, reconnaissance aircraft, night fighter, fighter bomber, and intruder. Its crew of two, pilot and navigator, sat side by side in a compact cockpit, depending not on armor or numbers, but on speed, surprise, and precision. Against the German night defense system, it offered something Bomber Command desperately needed: a way to attack the hunters. The intruder idea was simple. Do not wait for German night fighters to attack the bombers. Attack the night fighters first. Not over the target. Not inside the bomber stream. Attack them where every aircraft, no matter how dangerous in the sky, became vulnerable. At its own airfield. On takeoff. On landing. During those brief moments, even the best night fighter pilot had little room to maneuver. On takeoff, the aircraft was low, slow, heavy, and committed. On landing, it was even more exposed. Gear down, flaps extended, speed bleeding away, pilot focused on the runway, unable to break away quickly without risking a stall or crash. That was where the Mosquito waited. Early intruder missions used older aircraft, but they lacked the speed and reach to fully exploit the idea. The Mosquito changed everything. Now a two-man crew could cross the channel at low level, slip past radar, penetrate occupied Europe, and reach enemy airfields in France, Belgium, Holland, and eventually Germany itself. They did not fly in a stream of hundreds. They flew alone. No formation, no supporting bombers, no tail gunner, no one to warn them if something came from behind. Just two men in a wooden aircraft, moving through the dark. They crossed the English coast at dusk or in full night, dropped low over the channel, and flew so close to the water that the sea became part of their camouflage. German coastal radar struggled to separate the aircraft from the clutter below. Then came the enemy coast. The pilot lifted just enough to clear dunes, wires, barrage balloons, and unseen obstacles, then dropped down again over occupied land. Tree level, hedgerow level, fast enough to survive. Low enough to die instantly if the navigator was wrong. Inside the cockpit, the navigator worked with a map on his knee, trying to match darkness to geography. A river bend, a railway line, a road, a faint shape of a blacked-out town. Radio silence was absolute. They did not ask for help. They did not send position reports. They listened. German night fighter frequencies crackled in their headphones. Controllers gave vectors. Call signs moved through the air. The enemy's own radio traffic became a map of where the night battle was unfolding. Then the Mosquito reached its target airfield and waited. The waiting was often the hardest part. The crew might circle for an hour in darkness, over hostile ground, within range of flak batteries that could tear the aircraft apart if they saw it. They varied altitude, changed direction, avoided predictable patterns, burned fuel, watched the clock. Below them, the airfield might remain completely dark, a black patch inside a black country. Then, suddenly, a thin line of lights appeared. The flare path. For the German pilot below, those lights meant home. For the Mosquito crew, they meant target. A night fighter returning from a mission would line up with the runway. Its wheels came down. Its flaps extended. Its speed dropped. The pilot's attention narrowed to the runway threshold, the instruments, the glide path, the final seconds before touchdown. At that moment, he was no longer hunting. He was finishing the mission. Above him, the Mosquito pushed over. The Merlin engines rose in pitch. Speed built rapidly. The German aircraft appeared in the gun sight, framed against the runway lights. The range closed. A few hundred yards, then less. The Mosquito fired. For 20mm cannons and 4 machine guns struck at close range. At that distance, the burst did not need to last long. Cannon shells ripped through metal, glass, fuel tanks, engines, and cockpit. The German aircraft came apart, burned, or crashed beside the runway it had nearly reached. Seconds from safety. Gone. The flare path went dark immediately. Ground controllers killed the lights, hoping to protect any other aircraft in the pattern. But the Mosquito was already climbing away, engines at full power, disappearing before the flak batteries could react. The whole attack might last less than 30 seconds. The effect lasted much longer. Because the real target was not only the aircraft, it was the assumption that home was safe. At first, the Germans explained these losses as accidents. Night flying was dangerous. Pilots were tired. Engines failed. Landing approaches went wrong. Every Luftwaffe unit knew that darkness killed even without enemy action. But then it happened again. And again. Another aircraft destroyed on final approach. Another pilot killed within sight of his own runway. Another flash of tracer fire from above. Another report of a fast twin-engine aircraft vanishing into darkness at a speed German defenders could not match. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The RAF was not just sending bombers into Germany. It was waiting above Luftwaffe airfields and killing the defenders when they came home. The Kammhuber line had been built to look outward, toward the bomber stream, toward the approaching threat. It had not been designed to defend the airfields themselves from a lone attacker already inside the system. The Mosquito had found the blind spot, and it exploited it with ruthless patience. The psychological effect was corrosive. Before the intruder campaign reached full intensity, a German night fighter mission had an emotional rhythm. Briefing, takeoff, climb, interception, combat, return, then relief. The home airfield appeared. The flare path came on. The runway waited below. The pilot had survived another night. That relief mattered. It was the moment when the body and mind finally allowed tension to loosen. The Mosquito destroyed that moment. Now the danger did not end after combat. It followed the crew home. The runway was no longer a ribbon of safety. It became a brightly lit stage where the aircraft performed the most vulnerable maneuver in aviation while something unseen might be circling above. Pilots began landing faster than they should, accepting hard touchdowns to reduce time on approach. Some bounced. Some overshot. Some collapsed undercarriage legs. Others requested diversions to alternate fields, burning fuel and adding confusion. Controllers delayed turning on the flare path until the last possible moment. But that created a new danger. If the runway lights came on too early, they guided the Mosquito. If they came on too late, they endangered their own pilots. There was no clean answer. And that was the point. The Mosquito did not need to be present over every airfield every night. It only needed to be possible. The possibility alone changed behavior. That fear had a name. Mosquito panic. And once it entered the German night fighter force, it did not leave. At first, the Germans didn't understand what was happening. Aircraft were being lost on approach. Pilots were dying within sight of their own runways. Reports mentioned tracer fire from above, but no one had seen the attacker clearly. It didn't fit the pattern. Night flying was dangerous. Engines failed. Pilots made mistakes. Those explanations worked, until they didn't. Because it kept happening. Again and again. The realization came slowly. The RAF wasn't just fighting over Germany. It was waiting over German airfields. The system had been built to look outward, toward incoming bombers, toward the threat in the distance. Not upward, not inward. The Mosquito exploited that blind spot perfectly. A German night fighter returning from a mission followed a routine that had not changed in years. Contact controller. Receive landing instructions. Line up on the flare path. Reduce speed. Lower gear. At that moment, the aircraft became predictable. Slow. Low. Committed. That was when the Mosquito struck. The attack lasted seconds. A fast dive from above. Cannons firing at close range. No warning. Then it was gone. The flare path went dark immediately. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. At first, commanders treated these as isolated incidents. But the pattern grew. More losses. More reports. More uncertainty. And uncertainty is something a system like the Camhuber line was never designed to handle. Because the entire structure depended on timing. Detection. Response. Interception. The moment hesitation entered that chain, everything slowed down. Controllers began delaying launches. Just seconds at first. Then longer. Before every scramble, a question appeared. Is there something already above us? That question changed everything. A fighter that launched into a Mosquito trap might never reach the bomber stream. And losing aircraft on takeoff meant losing them for nothing. So crews hesitated. Controllers waited. Decisions slowed. And in a system measured in minutes. That was enough. A delay of 5 minutes cut interception chances dramatically. 10 minutes, and the bombers were already gone. The Mosquito didn't need to destroy the system. It only needed to disrupt it. The effects spread quickly. Pilots rushed landings and crashed. Others flew low to stay hidden and hit terrain. Some turned off identification systems and were shot down by their own defenses. These weren't recorded as Mosquito kills, but they were consequences, and they accumulated. The biggest change wasn't physical. It was psychological. Before, a mission ended with relief. Now, it didn't end at all. The danger followed the pilot all the way home. Even after landing, even walking across the airfield, there was no certainty. The base was no longer safe. It was just another target. Pilots adapted however they could. Faster approaches, harder landings, diversions to alternate airfields. But none of it solved the problem. Because the Mosquito didn't need to be everywhere. It only needed to exist. That possibility was enough to break confidence. And once confidence breaks, even the strongest system starts to fail. The German night fighter force was still skilled, still experienced, still dangerous. But now, every pilot carried doubt into the sky. Every takeoff became a gamble. Every landing became a risk. And every time the flare path lit up, they wondered. The attack itself was rarely complicated. It didn't need to be. A Mosquito crew would arrive early. Climb. Circle. Disappear into the dark. They waited. Sometimes for minutes. Sometimes for an hour. Below them, the German airfield remained silent. Then, engines started. Lights flickered. A fighter began its takeoff run. That was the moment. Takeoff and landing were the weakest points of any aircraft. Slow. Heavy. Committed. No room to maneuver. No time to react. The Mosquito dove. The engines roared to full power. Speed built instantly. The German aircraft filled the gun sight, framed by its own runway lights. Then fire. For 20mm cannons. Machine guns ripping through the dark. At that range, accuracy didn't matter. Destruction was guaranteed. The German fighter exploded, burned, or smashed into the ground. Sometimes before its wheels even left the runway. Sometimes seconds before landing. And just as quickly, the Mosquito vanished. Climbing, turning, gone. The entire attack lasted seconds. But its effect lasted far longer. Because it wasn't just a kill. It was a message. Nowhere was safe. Not the sky. Not the airfield. Not even the final seconds before landing. This was the real power of the Intruder campaign. Not destruction. Disruption. The Mosquito didn't need to shoot down every fighter. It only needed to make every pilot hesitate. And hesitation, inside a system built on timing, was lethal. German controllers began to delay launches. Pilots began to second-guess approaches. Airfields changed procedures, lighting, timing, anything to avoid becoming predictable. But every change created new problems. Turn on the lights early, you reveal the runway. Turn them on late, you risk your own pilots crashing. Launch quickly, you may fly into an ambush. Delay, and the bombers escape. Every choice carried risk, and that meant the Mosquito was already winning. Because the system had lost certainty, the results appeared slowly. Interception rates dropped. Fewer fighters reached the bombers. More bombers got through. No single night explained it. No single mission caused it. But month after month, the pressure built. The intruders didn't work alone. Electronic warfare intensified the effect. Jamming blurred radar screens. Chaff filled the sky with false targets. Units like Number 100 Group RAF coordinated everything. Bombers, deception, and mosquito intruders working together. Some mosquitoes even hunted German fighters directly, using devices like serrate radar detector to track enemy radar emissions. The hunters were now visible. The prey was not, and that changed the balance of the war. The German night fighter force was not destroyed in one battle. It wasn't wiped out. It was weakened, slowly, relentlessly. Confidence eroded. Timing failed. Decisions slowed. And the system that once controlled the night lost control of it. For the German pilot, the change was simple. Before, he hunted. Now, he was hunted too. Every takeoff carried doubt. Every landing carried fear. Because somewhere in the darkness above, there might be a mosquito, watching, waiting. And that was enough. Because once a pilot starts to wonder, am I the target?